So this panel is Detransition, What's Next? So I'll just introduce myself as the facilitator of this panel first. So my name is Elizabeth, and in addition to serving as president of WDI USA, I also coordinate our organization's Desisted and Detransitions Women's Caucus. So I spent 7 years lost in the gender vault before finding my way out in 2019. Thanks to all of you. So I have some opening remarks, and then I will introduce my panelists. We have some questions that are for all of them, and some questions that are specific to each woman. So I want to begin with a quote from a book that I read this summer. The book is Doublethink, A Feminist Challenge to Transgenderism by Janice Raymond. One common definition of survivor is a person who manages to live through a situation that often causes death. What we are witnessing in the detransitioning movement is women's resurrection from a type of living death that sentenced their womanhood to oblivion. This is an exciting, hopeful time to be an advocate for desisted and detransitioned women. This past June, in the case United States versus Skermeti, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that states can ban medical procedures aimed at disguising the sex of minors. At the moment, 27 states, including Indiana, have laws banning such procedures, and we won't stop until these procedures are illegal nationwide. And thanks to the work of WDI USA's state legislative advocacy team, we have provided testimony in support of many of these bills. Many hospitals, even those in blue states without bans, have shuttered or halted their so-called gender medicine clinics in an effort to comply with the Trump administration's Executive Order 14187, protecting children from chemical and surgical mutilation. This includes Children's Hospital Los Angeles, as well as Kaiser Permanente, which performed double mastectomies on Layla Jane and Chloe Cole at only 13 and 15 years old, respectively. And those two young women currently have lawsuits against Kaiser.
Go, go!
On July 9, the Federal Trade Commission pledged to investigate so-called gender-affirming care as an accepted trade practice.
Yes.
And they have issued a public request for information. That same day, the Department of Justice issued subpoenas to more than 20 doctors and clinics involved in performing sex trait modification procedures on minors. But the fight isn't over yet, and we can't become complacent. So executive orders are not laws, and the next administration could come in and reverse course. That's why it's so important to get laws passed, and why there's so much writing on the court cases, because they set a legal precedent. Lawsuits are important too. Hopefully they make insurance companies think twice about covering these procedures. And above all, what we most need is deeper, lasting cultural change so that girls and women are not led down this path to begin with. We need to connect the girls and young women coming of age today with powerful female role models who can help them to understand that the focus should be on changing society and not on changing your own sexed body. So that's a big project. We're not going to achieve that in a day or even in a year. But don't let that discourage you. So every day I find more and more women, one woman I met at this convention, who are waking up. There's so many more desisters and detransitioners than there were when I desisted in 2019, which is sad in its own way, but it does mean that the young women are finding their way back. So the 3 detransitioners on this panel are women working hard to bring about that cultural change I mentioned earlier. So I will now go ahead and introduce my panelists. So Claire, this is from left to right. My left to right, I suppose. Claire Abernathy is a 20-year-old detransitioner and advocate from Texas. At 12 years old, following a traumatic sexual assault, Claire began identifying as transgender. At 14, she was prescribed cross-sex hormones and underwent a double mastectomy. At 16, she made the decision to detransition and reclaim her life. Through public speaking, writing, and advocacy work, she shares her story to inform parents, policymakers, and healthcare providers about the lasting consequences of medical transitions in vulnerable youth. Elle Palmer, in the middle, is a 25-year-old woman who spent 5 years identifying as a quote-unquote transgender man. She took testosterone for 3 years, then detransitioned before she was 20. Since her detransition in 2019, Elle has spoken openly about the struggles in her life that led her to coming out as a quote-unquote trans boy at 15, the harms from childhood transition, and the lifelong effects that remain even years after her last shot of testosterone. Elle began speaking publicly so she can share her story with as many people as possible, and hopefully reach the ones who need to hear it the most. And then on the end, we have Prisha Mosley. Prisha is a detransitioner, mother, and an advocate. She has testified in front of legislatures in more than 20 states and works hard on advocacy to end trans medical fraud and abuse. She is currently suing her doctors in the appellate court of North Carolina and was the first detrans plaintiff whose case was found to have merit in the world. So if you'll join me in welcoming Claire. So our first question is, what detrans advocacy are you most proud of and why? And how can we support you in these efforts?
I love doing legal work. I love traveling to testify. This last April, we were in Texas, my home state, and I got to speak to the representatives from the county I was transitioned in. And it's a very gratifying, it's a very fulfilling act. The way that you all can help us with that is by finding the groups that help fund us and donating to them. I'm an IWF ambassador, and so is Prisha. That's who pays for us mostly to be able to do that. LGBT Courage Coalition is another great group to look into. And I'll pass it on.
I got to go to Montana in March for a bill that was basically going to ban any future girls who went through the exact same things that I went through in Montana when I was transitioned there. And I spoke 3 times as the bill was escalating up the chain of command, to try to pass this bill, which was banning children from taking testosterone or taking hormones and puberty blockers and having surgery, and was also allowing children who transitioned to be able to sue their medical providers up to age 27. I was able, along with Prisha's testimony and many other detransitioners who were able to either join us in person or over Zoom, we were able to get that bill passed.
Wow.
Unfortunately, under the bill, it is not retroactive, so I am not able to sue, but I look forward to the many, many children who are going to be able to benefit from this bill in the future.
Thank you. I've testified in the majority of the states where gender-affirming care, quote-unquote, or the trans medical harm and abuse of children is now banned. A lot of the bills in this state differ from each other in some ways. North Carolina, for example, where I am suing my providers, has a retroactive statute of limitations passed through HB 805, which would allow people like me to sue, and that state gave 10 years. Other states have given closer to 15 or 25, and apparently there is a federal bill out right now called the Chloe Cole bill, which is meant to help detransitioners sue for up to 30 years. I believe it is after. But that bill is not retroactive because Congress can't work that way. So more work needs to be done at the state level, particularly need help with detransitioners holding their doctors accountable. Unfortunately, speaking out hasn't made our doctors stop. Like, I've looked up my doctors' names and they're actually getting promoted and stuff like that instead of stopping. So speaking out isn't stopping them. They need to be stopped. So I think sharing the work and the good news and the bad news about the advocacy that detransitioners, as well as whistleblowers and parents and other people are able to do, that's important. Share it, talk about it, be outraged, and also be a place of empathy for people who are considering detransitioning. That does mean being kind and having an open heart towards people who identify as trans, but change only comes through showing people that it's not death before detransition, it's life after detransition.
Yes.
Thanks. So I think we'll move on to the question for Claire. So I turned their speaker spotlights into larger versions for the slides. So this is from Claire. Sometimes I think about how I'm going to have to live with this regret and shame for the rest of my life, and I struggle to find the motivation to keep going. Then I remember I'm not the only one. If I don't stand up for detransition girls like me, who will? So my question for you, as the youngest member of this panel, you detransitioned before graduating high school. How can detransition women deprogram from gender identity ideology and heal either on their own or in groups? And where does the women's liberation movement factor into this?
It's a good question, thank you. For me, the first step in deprogramming was just giving myself permission to question the framework of gender identity at all. I'd been told that doubting it in any way made me bigoted. But once I gave myself that space to reflect, I saw how much of it was built off of sexist stereotypes. And healing for me meant reconnecting with my body as it is, and not seeing it as a project to mold into something else. Healing doesn't have to be a solitary process. When detransitioned women find each other, we realize that our experiences aren't isolated cases, but proof of the failures of a wider ideology. Sharing stories in groups like this allows us to break down the internalized narratives, structures, scripts of like wrong body thinking and rebuild our sense of womanhood on our own terms. The Women's Liberation Front, the Women's Liberation Movement is crucial here. Radical feminism offers us a framework that says that women are not defined by stereotypes. We're defined by our material reality as female human beings. And that perspective dismantles the very foundation of gender identity ideology and offers us not just personal healing, but a path forward, a collective path. I think that healing starts with curiosity, asking where these internalized beliefs about sex and gender come from, and whether they actually help us to live more freely, and whether they help women collectively. Sometimes that happens alone, and sometimes it happens with others. For me, finding communities of women who affirmed my reality as a female, an adult human female, was a huge turning point. And that's where women's liberation comes in. It provides us tools to unpick what is ideology and what is reality and reclaim our lives as women.
Thank you so much, Claire. So this quote from Elle is from a speech that she gave at a WDI USA event at the Seattle Public Library. She says, "The name Elle meant nothing to me anymore. It was my dead name. I was and always had been Luke, and I was never going to change my mind. Then I changed my mind." She says, "When I was 19, I stopped taking testosterone. I had spent the last year daydreaming about going back in time and growing up as a normal woman. 6 years later, I have come to terms with the fact that I was just a girl going through puberty who ended up in the hands of doctors and therapists who forgot the first rule of medicine, do no harm." So my question for Elle, while you were one of the first female detransitioners to speak out online on your YouTube channel, last November's WDI USA panel at the Seattle Public Library marked the first time you spoke in person. And since then, you've traveled all over the country to testify in support of bills that would prevent others from being harmed as you were. In particular, your testimony helped to extend the statute of limitations in your home state of Montana. Can you talk about this process and how other detrans women can do the same in their states?
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about my journey from young girl going through puberty to thinking that I was trans, to then detransitioning and finding that community. So it's hard to dissect why young girls end up thinking that they're boys. There are so many reasons that go into it. I think personally, and from what other detransitioned women have shared, is that almost all of us have gone through some sort of sexual abuse. And it's kind of obvious why that would make a young girl want to become a boy. But another very prevalent reason for girls our age is that we grew up with easy access to the internet, any possible information that we could find, and as young, intelligent, confused girls who have been abused, we all want to find a community of girls who have been through the same things. And often that led us to finding communities of girls who were rejecting their sex and finding comfort in running away from the thing that made them abused. But the flip side of that is that once we start to question why we ended up thinking that we were boys in the first place, we get to go back to the internet and find communities of girls and women who have been through the same things. So I started my journey of detransition with going on Reddit, which was one of the pitfalls that led me to transition. But I went to the Detrans subreddit, and back in 2019, it was very small, it was less than 10,000 people. And I started commenting and realizing that there were other women who had been through exactly the same thing. I actually found the Detrans subreddit because I was looking up how to stop going bald from testosterone as a trans man. And that led me to a post on the Detrans subreddit from a woman who wrote down her entire life story, basically from the moment she first thought, I'm not a girl, to detransitioning. And word for word, her story reflected mine exactly. And I saw myself in her immediately. And that was the moment that I realized a switch flipped, and I had been making a mistake that whole time for the past 4 years. So I decided to join that community and start commenting. And then I started making posts. And then I made my first YouTube video. And a lot of people resonated with it. And I ended up making a lot more videos. And I ended up being asked to make a Twitter. And that was probably the best decision that I have made in a long time, because I joined a thriving community of other detransitioners on Twitter, along with many radical feminists who had already started building a community by 2019 and 2020. And I've heard that those couple of years a lot during this event. It seems like that was kind of a critical turning point for a lot of people who started peaking and realizing that something was wrong. So I recommend joining an online community on some sort of social media platform. Twitter/X, formerly known as Twitter, is a very good one, in my opinion. And I have been able to join forces with many of the other detransitioners who have done activism, and we all have each other as friends, as backup, as allies, and we all get to support each other as we're all doing our work separately and together, and it's very great to have a group. And all of us try to bring other detransitioners that we meet into the fold. I met Claire last December at the Skirnetti rally. Elizabeth also met Claire. And I told her to make a Twitter, and now she's here.
Thanks, Elle. And I just want to follow up on something that you said about the Detrans subreddit. So I started looking at it, I think, around the same time. In 2019, it had around 5,000 participants. They're likely not all detransitioners. There's probably some supporters. There's probably some desisters like me. But the last time I checked, which I want to say was earlier this year, it had over 50K.
55,000.
Yeah. So it's grown substantially. So up next we have Prisha. She posted this on Twitter, and I was just like, yes, this is exactly what we're talking about. So feminism is the natural response to female detransition. This is several questions, but I'm counting it as one. Many of us follow you on social media, where you discuss the health complications you faced before, during, and after your pregnancy. Can you talk about those complications and your experience as a detrans mother, and educating those about what that's been like? How have you been helped during this time by other women? What are you doing to help others in the same situation? And how are you inoculating your children against gender identity ideology?
Thank you. These are really good questions. So yeah, I'm so lucky and blessed. My little boy is actually here. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen him. He's been happy to be around so many lovely women, and I'm grateful that I get to bring him around women who care about themselves, care about feminism, care about girls and younger women who are more vulnerable. So to answer the last question first, that's what I'm doing. I'm bringing my children when I can around women like all of you, and I think that'll make a difference and give them a secure foundation in themselves so they can see who they are and who they should be and how they should treat themselves and others, and understanding reality. Women is a sex-based class, and yeah, so I think that's a good way to do it. As far as the pregnancy, I was shocked that I got pregnant at first. When I missed my period and was having some discomfort and my doctor asked me if I could be pregnant, I actually laughed at him. I struggled with, I just couldn't get pregnant for many, many years. I thought that part of my life would never come. And I wondered to myself if my doctors thought that too. Did they just never think that I would want to grow up and meet someone kind and caring and be normal and have babies? Like, I was just supposed to stay miserable and in agony and having a gender crisis my whole life, I suppose, and giving them money for prescriptions and getting continual surgeries as they invent new barbaric things to do to women's bodies. But that's not what happened. I met someone who was kind to me, and I actually started birth control, which is how I got pregnant. But it has estrogen and progesterone in it, and I guess that's what kickstarted things. But within like a month of that, I found out I was pregnant. So the pregnancy was very difficult. I have like full-blown pelvic atrophy that's really difficult to deal with, and it made it difficult to carry him. And my hips, because I started testosterone when I was 17 and I had a very severe eating disorder, I hadn't completed puberty and my hips didn't finish getting far apart enough, so I couldn't deliver him naturally and had to have a C-section, which was scary and unfortunate to me because that was another surgery. I didn't want to have another surgery and then I had to have this one awake, but I was sure this time that I needed this one. There actually was a baby inside of me. It wasn't just something I felt or thought. So it was different, and I was treated differently. It's actually very strange to me. My C-section scar looks completely different than my mastectomy scar, and recovery from the C-section was much easier, and I felt more supportive and was supported and taken care of. But like my chest looks like, I don't know, did the surgeon have the lights off? And during my C-section, I was like yelling at these people. I was pretty scared, you know, I was like, "You're hurting me, stop," like all that, even though I was numb and everything, like I was freaking out. And they still did an excellent job, and the numbness is a lot less. It's just a much better surgery, and I think that's because well, doctors regularly have meetings together sharing their best techniques for C-sections and how to help women giving birth, because it's something important. It's an actual medical need, and it's something that needs to be done, but they don't do that about top surgery. They just realize that they can make more money on the side doing it, and then the worst of plastic surgeons hop on the bandwagon and do it. It's not good surgeons who are doing a good job, or oncologists who see women with breast cancer and stuff like that who decide to do this. It's shady plastic surgeons in little clinics, or people who get big names in gender clinics and can make a lot of money doing it. But they're not caring, ethical doctors. I had really severe complications in my chest as a result of giving birth. My nipples were grafted, so they were cut off of my chest and reshaped and reattached in a male position, and they don't connect to anything inside me. But my surgeon left breast tissue inside of me, and my milk came in, and my chest was surgically sealed shut, and there was nothing I could do. The medicine they gave me to lower my prolactin made me want to kill myself, so I ended up taking the advice of women and midwives who told me to get cabbages and score them and bind my chest, and then I took a hell of a lot of Sudafed. It was really hard for like a month, and I'm still really traumatized and damaged from it, and I don't know what to do, but I want to have another baby, and this can never happen again, so that means I need to have surgery again. Yeah, so there's just so much unknown. I'm aware that I'm being experimented on again, but I love my friends, and I love women who believe that they're men and hate themselves, and I went in blind, so I'm just going to keep sharing what happens to me and hopefully let other people not go in blind.
Thank you so much for sharing. So this is a question for all of you. What gives you hope as you move towards the future?
There's a lot of things to be hopeful about right now, to be honest. The Chloe Cole Act is being heard in Congress, which would federally ban gender modification surgeries and hormones for minors. Speaking of Chloe, her lawsuit, their last opportunity to have it sent to private arbitration just passed, and it is going to jury trial, probably sometime this year. There's a lot of things to be hopeful for, and things are changing. The bill that we testified on in Texas that would be expanding insurance coverage to detransition procedures passed, and we're very excited. I mean, I got a breast reconstruction following my mastectomy, and it's been a really amazing thing for me. It's being confronted with the worst thing that ever happened to you every time you look in the mirror is not something that we should be subjecting people to. And other states, Arizona, Oregon, Maryland, New Hampshire just did one, are doing similar bills. That's my main thing that I've been pushing for recently is insurance and medical research, medical access for detransitioners. And we're seeing a lot of success in that area.
Honestly, everything Claire said, I absolutely agree with. The first thing that came to my mind, though, was just the fact that I am in college right now, and I am really looking forward to finishing my bachelor's degree. Maybe unsurprisingly, I'm studying psychology, and I really enjoy it. And I'm just kind of hopeful for my future of potentially going to grad school, maybe getting into academia, doing some research. I would love to, I have a lot of ideas of the things that I could research related to gender stuff. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, well, my child gives me hope. I have a stepdaughter too, actually, and she's the reason that I detransitioned. I started watching her for my boyfriend. And also, I just want to clarify, he would be my husband, but I also have legal trouble because of the name change and the sex change legally. He doesn't want to be married to a man named Charlie, and I can't blame him. Yeah, it's all kinds of trouble, like everything everywhere. But this wonderful man, yeah, I started watching his daughter, and even before I was ready to start living as a woman, and I still had a beard and wore men's clothes and everything, she started calling me mommy. And that's why I started living in the truth. And now I have my own baby who actually came from my body, and he's okay, and he's happy and healthy, and everything is good. So I would say that children give me hope. Other detransitioned women are having babies too. Daisy and Grace have both had babies, and I see that in the future for the two women sitting next to me. So I have a lot to be hopeful for, and so do you guys.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love hearing about everyone's detransition work, and then I love hearing updates about what's going on in people's personal lives and how they're building a life after detransition. So I just want to give a few closing remarks, and then we'll have plenty of time for audience Q&A, which is fabulous. So I just wanted to talk about the lizard logo, or the lizard symbol. So the Desisted and Detransition Women's Caucus has a lizard kind of superimposed on the WDI logo, and you probably also see this emoji in a lot of detransitioners' bios. Because some species of lizards can regrow their tail, the detransition community has adopted it as a symbol of regrowth and new life after loss. And Liz Fedek gave me a ring, actually. So the sisters have kind of adopted it as well. So I just wanted to close with that because I think it's very much in the spirit of this panel that there's growth and new life after loss, and these women are helping to show the way to that.
You can also see the lizard on some of our bodies as well.
So that concludes the questions that I have for you, but we have plenty of time for audience Q&A. I'm probably just going to let Q&A run all the way up until when we need to close the convention, because that's the only other thing we've got going on. And if you have questions that are for someone like in particular, feel free to let her know.
Yes, so hi, I am in the cohort of people who would have transitioned, like all of the risk factors I have. So these are my women that are getting gotten. I feel very strongly about this. Awkward women who hate themselves are my people. When I'm not doing this, I'm sorry, there's a question. So when I'm not doing this, I kind of go into online spaces that are full of trans-identified women who hate themselves, and I am the cool older sister who supports them and encourages them to be creative. And when I'm not working, I'm basically trying to rescue these women. So my question is, what kinds of materials would be helpful to have on hand? What do you need more of that would be healing? Do you need analysis, or do you need like storytelling, where it's a story about a girl who hates herself and then learns through time to be a total badass like you three?
So, every person is different. A lot of these women are autistic, and they're, in my experience, two flavors of autistic women. There's the very like analysis, very like math focused, and then the more creative type. I think you're talking about the more creative type, and that's me. We respond more to like narrative, like something we can see ourselves in, more so than like data and science.
Some of us are both.
This is true. This is true.
what you're asking, it kind of reminds me of how I was able to come out of my delusions by reading another detransition woman's story, like word for word, having it relate to my own life. That is how I relate to everything. So being able to see myself in somebody else's story. I mean, if you have had a similar experience, like if you were, a little bit younger and you would have gone through the exact same things that we have gone through, tell your story. You will be able to, by laying out your life and the women who are trans-identified being able to relate to the things that you have gone through as well, and you saying, I never transitioned, and I'm okay. I love myself. I love being a woman. I have a fulfilling life without gender. That is going to get them home.
Can I just jump in? Could we get a show of hands for anyone who thinks that if they'd been coming of age today, they think they would have thought they were a boy? This is why it's so important that we talk to these women who are lost, and we can say, I'm a happy woman today and I made it out. Okay.
Yeah, I would just say the same thing, like sharing not only stories of I struggled like you, but stories of hope, and like I said, there's a very big narrative going on right now of death before detransition, and we're seeing this, and that means, death of others, because as has unfortunately happened, but also death of the self, like suicide rather than transition, and we're seeing a lot of this. So I would say sharing stories of life after detransition, or better yet, life without transition at all. That would be great. Yeah, sharing those stories.
Hi, thanks so much to all three of you. So I have a podcast on my Substack, and I most recently spoke with Jamie Reed and Lauren Legere at LGBT Courage Coalition. And by the way, I would love to have any or all of you on a podcast soon. But I asked Jamie, in her view, how long does she think it's going to take to end this whole gender juggernaut? And her answer, unfortunately, was not very hopeful. She said, I'm in it. I got into this knowing I'm in a 30-year fight. And she said, the reason for that is that, we won Spermeti. Awesome. We're going to win the sports cases next term. Awesome. You all are going to get laws passed at the state level. Fantastic. But then she said, there are going to be so many people whose lives need to be put back together. And I just find it so overwhelming to think about all of the people who are still caught up in this and all of the people who are going to detransition. And, thank you for your work on getting those statutes of limitations extended, for sure. Sometimes it just feels a little bit overwhelming to think about, once we end the really bad stuff, how do we make it all good again?
I think that's a wonderful question. First off, thank you for asking. And I would like to go on your podcast, yes.
I recommend.
I think that's a lifelong goal. That's a lifetime thing. There are medicalized people, and there are parents who are going to be the Japanese soldiers on an island 50 years, didn't know the war's over. And we are always going to have to extend empathy to those people and extend love and care and show them that there is a way back. That is the only way that we get through this. And it's uncomfortable because they suck, but we have to be willing to do that. We have to be willing to extend empathy even when it is uncomfortable. I do think there's going to be a large cohort of detransitioners coming. I think that the medical systems will be overwhelmed. I even think it's possible that 10 or 20 years in the future, when you're filling out like health surveys at the beginning, they might ask you, have you ever taken cross-sex hormones? Because of how massive this is. I think it's going to change medicine forever. And right now, there are a lot of doctors and people trying to put together a new experiment for how to help the medicalized bodies that were created by the original one. I think this changes laws and how we do legislation, and will view judges and litigation and all of it. I think the impact could be permanent. It's also in academia. I think how much we can trust schools and how studies are done and what is studied and the ethics of consent, and all of it is, under scrutiny and going to change. This makes me think about the idea of hysteria, the idea that women could have evil uteruses that make them sad, so you need to cut them out to make them better, and how that changed medicine, and we still call women hysterical for the way they behave, and that it might be related to this evil body part that needs to be removed. So yeah, I think the impact is going to be forever, but hopefully we can learn from it, not do this again, and bring healing to the people who've been hurt. But I don't think there's a way of going back.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like we've been in this fight forever, because it's been almost my entire adult life. But it's only been, realistically, only less than a decade, right? And that is definitely not a very long time in the grand scheme of things. So yes, I agree with Lauren. I think it's probably going to be a 30-year fight. But the biggest thing that I think is going to help detransitioners is, just as the community grows, there's going to be more and more people who are going to be able to find each other and relate to each other. And I think community is just the number one thing that's going to move our lives forward. Like Claire said, it's a lifelong thing. And once you've been through it, there's no way back, ever, We're going to have effects for the rest of our lives. Like Prisha said, I agree with her. I think it is going to be a question on medical forms. Something that I tend to liken it to is the lobotomies. Even though there was a lot less of them performed than there are gender medicine, the people who had them could never go back. But we did eventually realize that it was incredibly barbaric and horrific, and the guy who invented it got a Nobel Prize and then got it taken away. So, here's hoping that we can all recognize that the society at large soon will be able to recognize how crazy this all is.
Thank you. And just real quick, yeah, the whole death before detransition thing is just awful, but it only exists because detransition exists, and that exists because you exist and because of women like Chloe and Layla Jane. And just thank you so much for speaking out.
Elise, and then Amy, and then whoever's next.
I follow Prisha and Elle, and I have for a long time. How do we find you, Claire? Are you on X?
I am on X. I burn your binder on X.
Sweet. So I have, it's kind of a two-part question, but very, very related to each other. I'm wondering, when you were going through transition and, particularly beginning transition, were there people in your life, adults, who were against it, and were they supportive? And my question really is, I do a lot of work. I have two daughters who are 9 and 11, and I do a lot of work with that sort of age group of girls. And so I'm wondering what your advice is for those of us, and we all know somebody who is caught up in this. what is your advice for us interacting with them while they are still lost? Because I don't want to hurt their feelings, I don't want to alienate them or upset them, but I also don't want to, encourage them further down the wrong path.
I love this question. My parents were very, very against it at first. And I was a very, very stubborn teenager. And I basically broke them down over the course of a year from age 15 to 16 until I finally was able to get them to sign off on hormones for me. So I think being very, very against it and, the constant arguing, the constant, I'm not going to let you transition until you're 25. Okay, I wish that had been true. But I think the best way to support the children in your life who are going through this is to love them the same as you would regardless. To try not to bring it up, try not to engage, but don't ever give in to the pronouns, don't ever give in to the name change, because that will only encourage them and make them think that they have support and push them further down the path. So, if you have to, if they will push you away, if you ever call them, she instead of he, just try to avoid it. But if the conversation ever comes up, just say, you're perfect and I love you no matter what. And just, it's a very fine line, it's a very hard line to walk. But in my experience, from what I've heard other parents say, it's very difficult to keep that relationship healthy and strong when the child is going through a transition. So if you can in any way just preserve the strong relationship that you have, they will feel comfortable coming to talk to you about it. The more you show support for them as a person, but not for the transition.
I also love this question. And similarly, my parents were initially, they weren't fully against the idea of transitioning. They just thought that I was getting into it too fast. Like I mentioned, I'm autistic. I get fixated on things, and they saw that this was something that I was getting fixated on. The breaking them down wasn't really on my part. It was on my therapists, who made them feel like abusers. Made them believe that the self-harm and the eating disorder that I adopted after being assaulted were because they wouldn't call me a boy. And so then they socially transitioned me, and then we started seeing a new doctor who was even worse, and made them feel like it was the reason that nothing was getting better was because they wouldn't medicalize me. And so then they did, and everything just kept getting worse. And that's how it goes. You are the adult in the room, is what you need to remember whenever you're dealing, even with kids who aren't trans-identified. You're the adult in the room. You know more. This is something that we've lost sight of in child development circles. The reason we act like adults are smarter than children is because adults are smarter than children. Isn't that a hot take? Well, children need to feel like the adults in the room have it figured out. Like they are in control and they know what's going on.
Yep.
And doctors actively undermining the trust that children have in their parents and in the adults in their life is one of the greatest injustices of our time, in my opinion.
I just want to add that I totally agree with that, and that is part of why preserving that relationship is so important, so that they respect you, they trust you, and they will listen to you way more than if you start arguing with them and trying to make them believe that they are wrong.
Yeah, I thought both of those answers were really good. My final piece of advice to add on to that would be to invest in things that they are and things that they do that are outside of a trans identity. The ideation becomes an obsession, and it's very unhealthy, and it starts to affect all of your thinking and how you view the world. So if you can invest in the person or the child in any other way, pretty much, help any other hobby, any other interest, any other thing that you could do, invest in that and encourage them, and that's pretty helpful too. And that can help build a relationship as well. You can have a relationship about it.
Get them to do sports.
It was getting into theater and music for me, is what finally brought me out of it.
Amy, do you want to go next?
Prisha, I'm really glad that you brought up hysteria. I spoke last year, none of you were here, but I spoke about the history of sexism within the DSM. Hysteria, which was coined by Aristotle, only came out of the DSM in 1980. So it's not only been with us since antiquity, but it was formally medicalized and put in the DSM. So this leads to my question, which is, I think all of you know, I have been going hard after the diagnosis of gender dysphoria. I think it's a really junk, problematic diagnosis that's a lot of ultimately smoke and mirrors. It doesn't really describe anything, and it's rooted in sexism. All of the diagnostic criteria and then the diagnosis itself, the things that it prescribes to deal with the diagnostic criteria are all just sexist, rooted in deep sexism. So my question is, we have a lot of wins in terms of detransitioners going after the medical establishment, and I want to know, is there any lawsuits going on to deal with the mental health profession and the mental health community? And I think all of these therapists and counselors are equally culpable as the junk plastic surgeons. So is anything happening on that end?
Yeah, that's a great question. The therapists and mental health professionals who tout themselves as the experts are definitely very responsible for pushing you down the pipeline of transition. And gender dysphoria certainly is a sham diagnosis. I mean, gender itself doesn't even exist. It's just the sexist idea of what men and women should be, so the whole diagnosis is a sham. I am suing not only my endocrinologist and surgeon, but I'm also suing 2 therapists. Well, actually, funny story about that. Through suing one of them, I discovered that she's not even licensed as anything. Not a doctor, not a therapist, not any type of professional. But I was referred to her by my endocrinologist so that she could write me a letter of recommendation, and then I could start testosterone. And so I guess she was just a lady renting an office that told children that they were trans. Yeah. So and it took $300.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm suing her, and then there was an actual therapist involved who was aware of my situation. She was aware that I had a lot of trauma, I had an eating disorder, and it's really strange. She was telling me that I was not overweight and that I needed to eat to live, but also telling me that I was born in the wrong body and that I needed to transition to live. And so I'm suing her and the entity which hired her. So, and I know this is true for most of the detrans lawsuits. Our therapists are included.
Okay.
I don't think we have time for any more questions. Yeah, I'm so sorry. But they're all on Twitter, so feel free to reach out with any further questions that you have. on it. It's now time to close the convention, as sad as I am to say that.